For our unit exam review here, okay, our first topic in this unit was the cell theory, okay? So should you know the 3 points of the cell theory? Yes, they absolutely set up wonderfully for a multiple choice question that goes something like this: which of the following is not part of the cell theory, as most multiple choice questions have 4 points. Okay. Since there are only 4 names you need to know, and they've all been on a quiz at some point in this unit, you should know all 4 names and why they are important or what they did. Okay, so Hooke was the physicist who built the first microscope. Leeuwenhoek was the first person to view living cells, living being the key word there. Okay, and Schleiden and Schwann came up with the cell theory themselves. Now, the second point of the cell theory was part of our cell anatomy lab. It is probably the most important part of the cell theory, and as a result, can probably be worked into some of your written response answers. Okay? If a question is asking you about something a cell does, you could probably find a way to work in that all cells carry out the basic functions, and maybe this is one of them. Okay? But it's certainly something that shows that thing that's really important. Level of detail, yeah, that thing. Okay? It's just one of those things that says, hey, Mr. Coderre, I really understand that this can tie into this idea as well as this idea. Okay? So just be on the lookout for an opportunity to work that in to one of your written response answers, or more than one. Okay. Size estimation and microscopy. So there could definitely be some multiple choice questions about the use of the microscope and being able to properly estimate the size of what you are looking at. So if I'm looking at something through the high power lens, then I would know that the distance from here to here is 400 micrometers. How big is that thing I'm looking at? Just an estimate. Yeah, I'd say 350. I'd probably accept answers between 320 and 380, as long as they weren't 400 or less than 300, really. Okay, they would be a reasonable estimate for the size of that object. If you have an object that is less regular than this, like let's say it looks like this, which dimension do you estimate, the longest or the shortest? The longest. That's important because on your exam you might get something that's oblong like that, okay? And you would have to remember that I'm not estimating it on its narrowest, I'm always estimating on its largest dimension. Okay, and then modes of nutrition, okay, was the next thing we went over after we did the microscopy lab. We talked about modes of nutrition, that's chemoheterotrophs and photoautotrophs, and how that relates to the structure of the cell. Okay, so basically why plant and animal cells look different. Okay, that's something that would definitely be in the multiple choice, but could probably also be worked into an answer in a written response question as part of your level of detail. Okay, for example, if you were to get a question that said, here's a cell, label the following structures and identify whether it is a plant or an animal cell and explain why. Well, part of your explanation could probably talk about this organism is this mode of nutrition. Okay? That's level of detail. Okay, cell structure, labeling. Yep, it's definitely on there. It's in the written response. There's a picture of a cell, and then a table underneath it. And in that table are 6 numbers? I changed it now. Right? 5 or 6. So you have to label and give the function of the requested or numbered structures. And, incidentally, you also have to tell me what kind of cell it is and explain why. Perhaps I spoiled that 30 seconds ago. Okay, another term we learned that day when we went over the parts of the cell and what they do was compartmentalization, that thing that all eukaryotic cells have that prokaryotic cells do not have. Also something that could end up somewhere, okay, as maybe level of detail on a written response or multiple choice question. Okay, in that same lesson where we went over the parts of the cell and what they do, we went over cell transport. There were 6 different things we talked about. The big 3, and then we talked about movement in and out of the cell that involved changes in the membrane. Okay. What were the big 3?
Diffusion, osmosis,
And the other one? Diffusion, osmosis, and? Those 2 are passive. The other one is?
Active.
Active transport is the third one. Okay? Those are in the multiple choice and in the written. And I'm pretty sure there's at least one question about each of them in the written. Okay? So what do you need to do with a question about cell transport? I'll tell you. It'll be a situational question. So it'll say, here's a situation that either a cell or an organism is in. Which cellular transport process would be most involved or responsible for this situation? How and why? Explain. Okay, so your first mark would be for identifying that it's osmosis, or diffusion, or active transport, whichever is appropriate. Okay? You get probably 2 marks for explaining how that process works in general, and then another 2 marks for how it works in that particular situation. Okay? So it's application of your knowledge, big time. Most of the questions on this test are application of knowledge questions. Okay? So being able to look at a situation and go, from what I know about osmosis, which is the passive transport of water across a membrane to balance salt concentrations, this cell that is in salt water is going to shrivel up because water will be drawn out of it by osmosis, which is passive and can't be controlled by the cell until the cell shrivels up and dies. Okay? I identified it was osmosis. I explained what osmosis is. Okay? It's the most important parts. It transports water across a membrane to balance salts. And then I explained what would happen in that particular situation. Okay? Does everyone follow a level of detail there? Okay. Make sure you write in 5 marks, because you know what a lot of people will write for 3 marks? Osmosis, cells will shrivel up because osmosis balances salt. Okay? Nothing about across a membrane, nothing about water only. Key points, level of detail. Okay? All right, so the big 3 are going to be in the written response. The other 3, about exocytosis and endocytosis, will not be in the written response. Okay, now, for diffusion, remember that diffusion is that passive process that transports, that takes care of basically all intracellular transport within the cell. Okay, it moves things from high concentration to low concentration. It's not targeted. Okay, it's slow over long distances, but just fine over short distances. It's kind of a shotgun approach. Okay, all of those things are important if you're explaining why diffusion applies in a certain situation. Okay, if we're talking about active transport, that one's different than the other two because it actually uses energy to pump materials through the membrane against the gradient, that is from low concentration to high concentration, which is the opposite of the other two. Okay? In order to move things through the membrane, it activates carrier or transport proteins. When we went over that lesson, I made you write that in on your notes. And I've mentioned it again today and circled it. Do you suppose it would be part of the level of detail for a question about active transport? Nod your heads yes. Okay. Do you suppose there are a lot of diagrams and pictures on this test? Yes, a lot. Okay? If I bother to put a diagram on a question, there's probably something important in the diagram that either you need to recognize or see or explain. Okay, so make sure you look at all of the little details of the picture. Okay, because I wouldn't bother putting it on there and printing it in color, okay, if it wasn't important. All right. Then we talked about multicellularity. Okay. We talked about how a true multicellular organism has specialization. What was our example organism for this? Okay. The plant. Specifically what part? The leaf. Specifically the layers of the leaf. Okay? So if I, wanted to, let's say, test how much you remember and can apply about your knowledge of multicellularity and specialization and was to, I don't know, put a picture of the layers of the leaf on the test, okay? You should probably be able to tell me what the layers are, what they do, and how that illustrates specialization in a truly multicellular organism. Spoiler alert, I'm going to do that. Okay? I feel like you guys don't believe me when I say that, but it's true. All right, so remember that also there's advantages to multicellularity, the biggest one being that it overcomes the surface area to volume ratio problem experienced by large single-celled organisms. Okay, and I have leaf double underlined. Now, speaking of surface area to volume ratio, did we talk about that in another context during the unit? And it was also about like multicellularity versus single-celled organisms. Now, I guess you can look at your work and see if there's a place where maybe that came up and might relate to diffusion and cell size, things like that. And that's something that's going to be important because it tests both the idea of cell transport, diffusion, cell size, multicellularity, specialization, all in one question. So it's something to think about. You might want to have a look through the stuff you've done and see if there's anything about that in there. Okay, so we already talked about that, so I'm just going to skip it. And we already talked about examples of specialization. That would be the layers of the leaf. Okay, transport in plants. Okay, be able to explain in detail and apply your knowledge. Okay, again, could be a situational question. Maybe even one that's a lot like one of your analysis questions in the plant transport lab. What's the main transport process that helps with moving water in a plant? Osmosis, yeah. Okay. Should that be worked into your answer? Possibly? So if I was answering a question about how a plant transports water, okay, I would be looking for the process, so that would be osmosis that generates. Of course, our lab proved that, okay? We cut the roots off and the plant was still able to transport water. Okay, so that means that it came from the leaves and had to be osmosis. That it moves through the xylem, and that in the xylem, the polar nature of water is also important, cohesion, adhesion, okay? You know, the xylem tubes are very small to help facilitate that polar nature of water, working with osmosis. Am I putting a lot of little details in my answer? I've used the term xylem, I've used polar nature of water, I actually used the two behaviors of the polar nature of water, cohesion, adhesion. Those are little details that probably end up getting marks. Okay? If you just say, osmosis helps the plant transport water up. Okay, that is absolutely right, but lacking in detail. Okay? 2 or 3 out of 5. Okay, parts of a plant. So, know the phloem and xylem, know what they transport, where they transport it, how that works, what forces are involved. You know, that basically that stuff I just said about the xylem. What does the phloem transport? Sugar. How? Gravity, yep. Okay, also, probably not a bad idea to know where those structures are. Phloem's on the outside, okay? Xylem's on the inside. Okay? I told that story about ringing a tree, okay, where you cut through the phloem and all the sap leaks out, and the roots starve and the tree dies, okay? Okay, plant growth, development, adaptation. There's going to be some multiple choice questions as well as some written stuff about that. Okay, specifically hormones, tropisms. Okay, be pretty easy to make some multiple choice questions up about plant hormones with pictures. Okay, so if I put a question about a tropism on the test, okay, so let's say I make a question like this. I've got a plant in a box. Okay? And I say the plant is placed in this box that only has a small opening at the top. It is found that even if the plant is turned upside down, it still grows out the hole. What would this be an example of? no matter which way I turn the box. Okay, let's say I set it on its side, I turn it upside down, the plant always grows out the hole. What is this an example of?
Phototropism?
Perfect, there's one mark. This is an example of phototropism. All right, I would also ask for you to explain how and why. So in that explanation, I would probably be looking for the explanation as to how all tropisms work. Okay? Auxins are secreted to one side of the plant so that it grows faster than the other side. This results in a bending of the plant towards the stimulus or away from the stimulus. Okay? There's your explanation. That works for any of them, whether it was geo, thigmo, or phototropism. Okay? And then you say phototropism occurs because plants grow towards light. Okay? The only source of light is the hole in the box. So naturally, the plant would grow out the hole of the box, no matter what the orientation of the box was. Okay? Have you just demonstrated that you could identify what type of growth it was, how it happened, and why it occurs? Okay? Would there be enough detail in what we just talked about for 5 marks? I would say so. Phototropism, growth pattern towards light. Light's required for plants to live. Okay? And it's caused by auxins being secreted to one side of the plant, so that one side of the plant grows faster than the other and causes the plant to bend. 5 marks. Okay? Now, what if you then said, but it could also be geotropism? Now what have you done? The answer is you've just lost 2 marks. Because you just contradicted yourself. Okay? Science is not politics. You cannot sit on the fence and say things that please both sides. You have to pick one. Okay? I am going to set this up so that it is one tropism and one tropism only. And it's going to be obvious if you look at the picture. Spoiler alert, there's a question just like that with a picture on the test. Okay? So pick one. Don't say more than one, because if you do, you're contradicting yourself, and what that says to me is, I really wasn't sure, Coder, and it's because I really don't know how they work, so I said both. Okay? Don't contradict yourself. Pick one and be detailed about it. Okay? All right. Okay, so on this one, if you said it could also be geotropism, okay, not only would that be wrong, because if it grew this way, that's not geotropism, okay, or down, also not geotropism. It said no matter what way I oriented the box, it grew out the hole. That can't be geotropism, because that only makes a plant grow up. Phototropism can make a plant grow anyway, so can thigmo. Okay, but geotropism can only make it grow up. All right, and then factors affecting plant growth. Okay, we just did a lab design activity about that. It's probably something that would be useful to know. It could probably be worked into a couple of your answers in the written response, but there will be a few multiple choice questions, okay, about factors affecting plant growth. Okay, so abiotic factors, those are things like water, temperature, light, okay, soil. Biotic factors were predaceous organisms, infections, fungal, parasitic stuff, okay, things like that. Competition from other plants. Okay, and then surface area to volume ratio and diffusion. So I talked about it already once before, but I'm bringing it up again, so that means it's probably important and is likely to be on the test and related to the activity we did on it that nobody seemed to want to talk about this morning. So have a look over your stuff, find that one. Okay, so we'd be looking here at the effect of increasing cell size. Why can't cells get big? Okay. So, like we said, 26 multiple choice and 8, because I changed it. 8 written. Okay, so, little bits of detail here about it. So in the multiple choice, like we said, some stuff on microscopy, some stuff on cell structure and modes of nutrition, cellular transport, parts of the cell and what they do, plant growth and development, plant transport, being a eukaryote versus a prokaryote, cell theory, cell structure, plant growth and development, plant hormones, tropisms, plant growth and development, modes of nutrition, cellular structure, microscopy. Okay, that's the stuff that's in there. And then for your written response, how a plant as a multicellular organism can regulate water loss. Okay. The tropism question I told you about. Labeling a cell. There are 6 structures that you will have to label and give the function of. Since you don't know which 6, that means you have to know them all. Okay? There were around about between the 2 cells, 17 or 18. Okay? Structures that you would need to know the structure and function of. And you'd have to tell me what the diagram, what cell is in the diagram, plant or animal, and why. Multicellularity and specialization. Plant transport, cellular transport, cellular transport, cellular transport, and cell size. That's what's on there. Okay? So how do you prepare for a biology exam? You read your notes and or watch the recorded lessons. Okay? Because you have to know this stuff. Okay? It's not there's really not much for you to demonstrate here. You have to know it and then apply it. Okay? So that means there's going to be some memorization. What's osmosis? How does it work? What's diffusion? How does it work? Okay? What are the parts of the cell? What do they do? What are the parts of the plant, the leaf? What do they do? Okay, like there's a lot of stuff that needs to just be reviewed. Okay, so biology is very much the read and regurgitate science. Okay, chemistry is the learn and demonstrate. Physics is the learn, understand, and demonstrate. Okay, but biology is read and regurgitate. Okay, and apply. Okay, so there's lots of material that you need to read. Okay, make flashcards, quiz your friends, okay, something like that. But there's just a lot of stuff you need to know so that when you get to a question, you don't look at it and go, I have no idea what this question's about. Okay? So read your stuff over. What do I usually give you to help you prepare? There's a review package with some suggested review activities and questions and a practice test. This is the last unit you'll get a practice test for. Okay, I'm going to be weaning you off of that. Okay, but it's very much, these are all old exam questions that I no longer use, but are similar to ones I currently use. Okay, so same as in the chem unit, do this last. Okay, if you do it first, it's just gonna tell you you need to study everything, okay? Study first, then try the practice test, and you'll know what you need to go over again, okay? So that'll all be there, and I will put the recording that I'm making right now in with that as well, okay? And I would suggest you have a look at that over the next week, okay? Because your exam is Wednesday, so it's coming right up. Right. Questions from you guys? Anything you want me to go over in more detail or talk about? At the start of the year, you guys were my most vocal class. Now I can't remember what half of you sound like. Okay, you got some review activities you could be working on right now, so if more questions come up while you're doing that, I would be happy to answer them.